Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief scheduling announcement for this month. Longtime listeners will know that we typically release our episodes on the first and third Tuesdays of every month. However, due to a scheduling issue, our second episode of this month will not be going out on October the 15th. Instead, it'll be going out a week later on Tuesday, October the 22nd. So again, this month's second episode will be coming out 1 week later than we typically do on Tuesday, October the 22nd. Apologies for any inconvenience. Back to the show.
Also, stop sending me videos of your dogs pooping into solo cups. I'm not doing this.
Hello, fellow netizens, and welcome to Scandalous Games, the show where we take a closer look at video game-related controversies. I'm Kevin Impellizeri, and I do the research and share a story of a video game-related controversy to my friends.
I'm Phil, and you might as well consider me a video game newbie.
I'm Kate. I've been writing software for over 10 years, but not the fun kind.
So we're beginning our second month talking about the history of college sports in America as a sport, as a business, and its relationship to video games, tying into the release of EA Sports College Football 25, ultimately trying to get down to the question of why did it take so long for us to get another college sports video game? And in the last couple of episodes, we established the huge impact college sports has in the United States, and then talked about the early history of college sports and how the development of college sports in America, especially football, led to a panic over the safety of football in 1905, which eventually led to the creation of the National Collegiate Athletic Association, the NCAA. And then we talked about how, beginning with the rise of television broadcasting, going back into the 1950s, you saw how college athletics and especially college football became a mad scramble for better broadcasting deals, eventually culminating in a really important Supreme Court case that basically gave individual colleges and conferences the power to set up their own TV deals, which has created the kind of Hunger Games world that we have now, where we have a situation where the Big 12 has 16 teams, the Big 10 has 16 teams, and the Pac-12 has 2. And all that, setting up all that background, we'll now actually start talking about the way this impacts video games and talk about the history of college sports video games in America. But I promised last time that we were going to try a new segment, which we're going to do at the start of the month, the first episode of the month for these. We're going to something we're calling Scandalous Games Sportschat, where we talk about the state of sports here in the U.S. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to Phil Thomas.
That's right. Thanks, Kevin. And here on the Scandalous Games podcast is College Football Sports Chat, brought to you by no one, because we have no sponsors. Oh, yeah. Let's talk about the college football top 25, top 5. Starting with number 5, we have the University of Notre Dame. From the conference, well, I don't think they have one. Isn't that interesting? Number 4, we have the University of Alabama. Roll Tide. Yes, I think it's Tide. Whether that's an actual Tide or the laundry detergent, we'll find out. And if it's not the laundry detergent, Tide, please sponsor the podcast. At number 3, it's the University of Texas. Go Cows. Number 2, it's Ohio State, the Ohio State, not to be confused with the other university that is not the Ohio State. And coming in at number 1, it's that university with all the big linemen, all of those people that the Philadelphia Eagles drafted and are doing questionably well, but we really hope they turn it around. It's the University of Georgia. And that is the college football top 25. Top 5. Back to you, Kevin.
Yeah, I will say we're just for the sake of dating this, we are recording this on September the 7th. So it's very possible the top 25 what we're showing right now is not representative of the current college football landscape. But thank you very much, Phil. The start of the college.
By the time this airs, we might have locked in that Tide sponsorship.
But, yeah, that could happen. that could happen. You'll find that everyone has a price. And Tide, if you want to send me some numbers, we can figure out if you know what my price is. So yeah, we're at the start of the college football season. We're in week 2. And I thought I would at least bring up in the Scandalous Games Sportschat an interesting story I came across. And I don't know if you heard about this, Phil, but so feel free to chime in if you did. So one of the big programs this year is Florida State University in college football. The Seminoles representing the ACC, although there's lots of talks that they want to bail in the ACC and go to the SEC because realignment is nonstop. However, 2 games in, Florida State's a bit rough. They're 0-2 right now. And I thought I would bring up a story that was jumping around the internet over the course of the last several days. So a couple days ago, Florida State was playing Boston College. Florida State came into the game as a 17-point favorite against Boston College. And some people thinking maybe this is going to be a sure thing. Florida State's going to just do a beatdown on the Eagles over at Boston College, which inspired a guy on Twitter who went by the handle 321 Noel. So he's clearly a Seminoles fan. And on August the 27th, 2024, he posted the following, and I quote, "If Florida State loses to BC this weekend, I will eat dog shit out of a red Solo cup with a spoon and post a video of me doing it. Book it." End quote. Skip ahead to the end of the Florida State Boston College game, where Florida State was hammered by BC 28-13, falling to 0-2.
Oh God! Wait, so did this person do it?
And so this post went viral for all of the reasons you think why, because it's like, how's it started? How is it going? And a bunch of people checked in on this dude after Florida State shat the bed about whether or not he would, do something with that. And apparently he sent a DM to Jack McGuire of Barstool Sports saying, quote, "I'll catch y'all next season. My time on X is done for now. Good luck to everyone." End quote.
That's awesome. Good for that person to just be like, you know what? This is why I can't have nice things, and I'm out.
I think that's an appropriate response when you put out a thing like that on the internet. It's like, well, you can do it. Fuck no, I'm not doing that. I'm out.
I don't deserve to be here anymore.
Yeah.
Also, stop sending me videos of your dogs pooping into Solo cups. I'm not doing this.
I didn't follow up on the threads for that. I would not be shocked if there's some of that, and I don't want to see that. So yeah, this was Scandalous Games Sportschat. We started with the ranking, and then we ended it with people eating dog poop. Very promising segment this is. All right, so we talked a lot about the history of college sports in our last 2 episodes, but I hear you asking, what do banned 19th century football plays like the flying wedge and cutthroat broadcasting deals and conferences eating each other alive for an extra bit of TV money have to do with video games? I mean, this is a video game history podcast, and we talked a lot about a lot of non-video game history stuff. So this is where this comes in. And as the NCAA and American institutions of higher learning turn college sports into a vast money-making enterprise to the tune of billions of dollars per year, they also look for ways to generate money beyond the court and the gridiron. And to paraphrase a line from Mel Brooks, college programs quickly learn that the real money is in merchandising. And the NCAA and its member schools draw in substantial revenue from slapping their names, colors, and logos into basically anything they can. And it's speaking for myself, I've said it before already, I'm a really long-time Rutgers football fan. And when your family knows that you are a Rutgers football fan, it means that basically every birthday, every Christmas, you're getting Rutgers shit. So I have tons of Rutgers merch. I've got shirts, I've got hats, I've got Christmas ornaments, I've got novelty footballs.
There was a time when you had 2 Rutgers Snuggies.
Yes, I had 2 Rutgers Snuggies.
You didn't want one Snuggie.
I did not buy these things for myself. I just ended up accumulating these things. And my mom got to the point that anytime she went to the store and she loved to hunt out a bargain, and she's like, well, I got you this Rutgers shirt. Have it. Not that I asked for it, and it would just be sitting on my bed. It's like, okay, fine. I guess I got another Rutgers thing.
In your family's defense, you did also go to a stranger's house this morning for a porch pick of a buy nothing deal in our town. That was what?
It was a Rutgers mug.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm a shill. It was a mug with the seal of the university. I was going to get
Rutgers mug.
In my defense, I was going to initially get it to my dad, who, as I said, is a Rutgers fan. But I looked at it and I took it home. I'm pretty sure he has this one already. So I guess I have one now.
So a couple of things. Number one, That was adorable of your mom to do that. Number two, everybody needs a backup Rutgers Snuggie because what if one's in the wash? Obviously. I mean, come on.
What if I spill salsa out of my Rutgers salsa bowl?
You always need one in reserve, so yeah, and all of these things, they're officially licensed by the NCAA and or Rutgers, and the deals to create those things, so they're obviously not made by the university directly or NCAA directly. What they do is they contract with companies that make that kind of apparel, and they license it, and the way they license it is usually through an intermediary company that handles all of their licensing deals. And so like for a long time, it was the Collegiate Licensing Company. Collegiate Licensing Company is still around, but they're a subsidiary of a larger company now. But basically, that company is just there to act as an intermediary with the schools. It's like I can act in their behalf, and I can then talk to, apparel companies or, mug companies or whatever, and we can put this stuff out that way. And the deals, basically those companies that make that stuff then pay the licensing company, and they pay the NCAA, and they pay the schools to get those things. So that is a big part of collegiate revenue. I believe I mentioned last time, it's over $4 billion a year in this industry. And this extended brand promotion also for a long time extended to video games. And as we mentioned last month, for about 20 years, college sports video games were a regular part of the annual release cycle here in the States. And so with that in mind, what we're going to do is basically do a rundown of them and go from the start of college sports games up until when they stop and talk about college sports video games as a business. And the big question, where do athletes fit in this when it comes to creating a digital recreation of the collegiate experience?
Can I just add one thing related to sponsorships and jerseys, like related to what you were just talking about?
Go for it.
Recently, I learned that, how sometimes there's I think on football jerseys right now, there's a Nike swoosh, or on some Division I schools. Now, back in the day, there you go. Yeah. Kevin's got a Nike swoosh on his Rutgers jersey right now. So I thought that what happened was that Division I college sports would do some kind of collective bargaining where they would ask Nike or Reebok to, which one of you is going to give us the best deal on these jerseys? And whichever company won, that company would make the jerseys. But I think it's actually the opposite. Nike does not make those jerseys. What actually happens is that there's a completely different company that makes the jerseys. And what the league does is it solicits bids for sports brands to pay the league to have their logo on the jersey. Isn't that crazy?
And what's interesting is that different apparel companies will negotiate with different schools. The school, it's all separate too. It's I see this now with College Football 25. It's in Team Builder. You can create your own teams. And when you go into the website to design your uniforms, you can start out with a base that's a specific brand. I believe there is Nike, Adidas, and there's one other one. And so it's different ones do different deals with different schools. And this is a little far afield, and I'll try to keep this brief. I know where this started was in the 70s. In the 70s, you began to see, and Nike was the first one to do this supposedly. There's a really influential guy named Sonny Vaccaro who takes credit for this. That basically what he said, this is before, Nike was considered an athletic shoe company. And basically the way he tells this story, and he tells this story a lot, Vaccaro is going to be a character in this whole thing. But he basically says he would go to college coaches and say, I will pay you, the coach, to take on Nike apparel, and that will be all the gear that the players wear. Nike sneakers, Nike uniforms, whatever the stuff that they wore, like your sweat guards and all that stuff are Nike stuff. And then that became the start of the insertion of sneaker companies like Nike, like Reebok, like Adidas into college branding, because they would set up these deals with colleges. And then eventually this then begat specific sneaker deals. So the Air Jordans deal and stuff like that. And so that's my understanding of a lot of this too, is that initially it was some of these apparel companies going to the college coaches, specifically the head coaches, and saying, I will pay you, you use my stuff. And now we've got, of course, these, bigger deals and things. I don't know if that's still the case anymore, but yeah, I know they probably have some sort of competitive bidding system for these things.
So when you take that into account, based on what we're talking about with college athletes, I guess I shouldn't be surprised that all of this is going to be really weird, because all the sponsorship stuff around sports seems to be the complete opposite of what I would expect. Who's paying who? Is the brand paying the school? Is the school paying the brand? Who's getting compensated? Who's not getting compensated? It feels like the whole thing's upside down.
Yeah, and my understanding, if I'm getting licensing things correct, is that the people who would make that apparel reach out to these companies and say, we'll pay you a certain amount of money if you let us use your logos. And they say, okay, we'll let you use those logos. And then they make a part of that money too. So like, I think it's they pay them for the permission to use like, the Rutgers logo or whatever. And then they make the stuff. And then I think they get a percentage. I don't know the exact specifics of the deals. And also sometimes the coaches get a percentage. We'll talk about that. So all of this is these elaborate licensing deals in which money is changing hands such that different companies get permission to use the branding of those schools, the branding of the NCAA and all that stuff, the branding of the conferences, the branding of the bowl games, the March Madness, all of that. And we can go in even further, like things like the bowls are their own licensing deals too. The awards are their own licensing deals too. For example, if you play College Football 25, you'll notice that a bunch of the end of year awards aren't in there, like the Maxwell Award, for example. The Maxwell Award is the award for the best player that isn't the Heisman Trophy winner. And the Maxwell Award is not in College Football 25. It's like a generic name. Hey there, Phil and Edison. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief clarification for this section because I feel like I gave short shrift there to the Maxwell Award. So the differences between the Maxwell Award and the Heisman Trophy. The Heisman Memorial Trophy is awarded to the top player in college football. Meanwhile, the Maxwell Award is awarded to the best all-around player in college football. Now, you might be wondering what the difference is between the two of them. One of the biggest distinctions is who gets to decide who wins each award. So the voters in the Maxwell Award consist of members of the sports press, NCAA head coaches, and members of the Maxwell Football Club. Meanwhile, the voters in the Heisman Trophy consist of 870 members of the sports press, as well as previous Heisman Trophy winners, as well as one vote that comes from a fan survey. So the large thing is how they're decided. They're both given to the best players in the country that year. And the other thing is that the Maxwell Award is awarded before the Heisman Trophy. And so it is not uncommon for a prestigious player to win the Maxwell Award and then win the Heisman Trophy, but it's also not a guarantee. And some years a player will win the Heisman Trophy, but not the Maxwell Award and vice versa. So for example, the most recent winner of the Heisman Trophy was Jaden Daniels, a quarterback out of LSU. Meanwhile, the winner of the Maxwell Award was Michael Penix Jr., who was a quarterback for the University of Washington. So I hope that clarifies a little bit more the way these awards work out. Apologies for the oversight, and back to the show. Some are in there, some are not. It was actually a big deal when they got the Heisman Trophy to be in College Football 25. It could have been a generic.
Which award's the linebacker award?
The linebacker award is the Lombardi. No, it's the Lombardi award. I think the Lombardi award is the best defensive lineman. There are a bunch that aren't. The Butkus Award, Dick Butkus Award.
Yeah, that's what I thought. The Dick Butkus Award. Yeah.
Yeah, the Butkus Award, I don't believe is in there. Some are there. For example, the Lou Groza Award. The Groza Award is the reward for the best kicker in college football. That one's actually in there, but most of them aren't. So if you're going to play the game, it's a lot of generics. Anyway, so again, we're going to talk about the history of college sports video games. So what's really interesting about sports in general is that sports is really intertwined with the early history of video games. Like they're really interconnected. And I think in ways that it's really easy for certain people in the game community to kind of discount sports gaming. That I know the argument for a long time I heard was like sports gamers are not real gamers. If you play Madden every year, you're not a real gamer. If you play 2K, you're not a real gamer. You're playing the sports games. But sports games, in terms of genre, are one of the oldest genres in video games. Think about, for example, the first video game to gain mass popularity in the United States was Pong. Pong, of course, a recreation of tennis. And in fact, a lot of early home video game systems marketed themselves as digital recreations of live sports. For example, the Magnavox Odyssey was the first home video game system in the United States. It was released in 1972. Came with several options for the suburban armchair athlete, including football, hockey, and tennis. And later additions to the Odyssey library included, for example, a shooting gallery game, complete with a very realistic looking plastic rifle, by the way. There was also a skiing game, which actually never got released. And we only got a digital recreation of when the University of Pittsburgh put it together in 2023. I'll include the article. It's really fascinating about the skiing game. As a 1972 print ad for the Odyssey promised, quote, "With Odyssey, you participate in television. You're not just a spectator. The fascinating casino action of Monte Carlo, The excitement of Wimbledon, the thrills of a heated game of football can all be duplicated right in your living room, end quote. And meanwhile, a Bloomingdale's ad for several home game systems that ran in the May 9, 1976 edition of the New York Times boasted, quote, through the magic of digital scanning, the screen of your television becomes the scene of action worthy of center court at Wimbledon or the final round of the Stanley Cup playoffs, end quote. So sporting in many ways was really closely tied because at the time they're mostly marketing these on terms of sports that people knew about. You're not really seeing like abstract sci-fi until the late 70s. So in the early parts of it, you're seeing a lot of it being sports and sporting. Now, the earliest licensed sports games, that is video games with a brand tie-in with real sports leagues, teams, or players, first came out in the late 70s, with Mattel securing deals with the 4 major American professional sports leagues, the NBA, the NFL, the NHL, and Major League Baseball, to put out a series of branded titles for the Intellivision. Each game was creatively named after its respective league. They were called things like MLB Baseball, NFL Football. Interestingly, none of the games had any actual teams. It was just the brand for the league. We don't care if you're a Phillies fan. I hope you like Major League Baseball. And actually, one of the key selling points for the Intellivision as part of their marketing was they had better sports games than the Atari 2600. And there were a bunch of ads of like these side-by-side comparisons of, baseball and Atari versus MLB baseball kind of thing.
This was the first like league branding that ever came to a video game?
Yeah. Yeah, so these are the first times you're seeing like the chance to play an NFL football game as opposed to just a football game was on the Intellivision. So like the 2600 had games like basketball. It would take a long while after that before we got college games. And the earliest college sports games came out in the early 90s. On February the 21st, 1991, the NCAA announced a licensing deal with Nintendo of America and HAL America Inc., allowing the companies to use NCAA branding, conference names, and the name, colors, and logos of 16 schools in an upcoming college basketball game for the Super NES. The game was creatively titled NCAA Basketball, and it was released in September 1992 and was developed by Sculptured Software, which is a name we've heard a bunch on this show. Do you remember Sculptured Software, Phil?
I do not. Kate?
No, not at all.
Sculptured Software is like the Forrest Gump of Scandalous Games. They're everywhere. I'll give you an example. So longtime listeners will recall that Sculptured Software were one of the makers of the Health Hero series. These guys made Captain Novolent. These guys made Rex Spartan, Experimental Surgeon.
That's the very first thing we ever talked about.
Yeah. Our very first topic was about a lot of Sculptured Software games. Our second episode, the second one we ever recorded, was on the Turok naming contests. Turok was a game by Acclaim. Acclaim in the early 90s, when they wanted to make a big push as a big publisher, bought 3 studios, one of which was Sculptured Software. And Sculptured Software also made the SNES version of Mortal Kombat, which we talked about in our episode on the history of the ESRB. So this company keeps coming up over and over and over again. Wow. We may have to do a deep dive into Sculptured Software at some point. But back to NCAA basketball. And so features in college basketball's video game debut included a 16-team lineup of schools representing the SEC, ACC, Big East, Big 8, and Southwest conferences, a tournament mode, and a shifting perspective based on the ball's location, courtesy of some of that sweet SNES Mode 7. And the game was a critical and commercial success, with Nintendo boasting in a January the 7th, 1993 press release that the game, quote, exceeded expectations, end quote. I'm going to show you some footage of NCAA basketball to give you a sense of what this game looked like. All right, so here's a little bit of NCAA basketball in action. Field. And for the benefit of our listeners, we're watching a matchup from the YouTube channel Completionator, showing a game of Duke versus UNC. And the crowd goes wild. 3-2 UNC.
Wow. That's amazing. What year is that from?
That's from 1992.
That looks great for a game from 1992.
Yeah, September 1992 it came out. Yeah, it looks pretty good. Sculptured Software knew what they were doing. And there were a lot of positive reviews for this game, too. One thing that's really neat about it is like the character models look pretty good. They're big. The way that the perspective swings around, that's a very Mode 7 thing. Most people's criticism was the fact that the sidelines are kind of these single-colored voids. But beyond, of course, it looks pretty good for what it is. So yeah, pretty positive debut for NCAA basketball. And the first college football video game wasn't far behind NCAA basketball. And it came from the same people behind College Football 25, Electronic Arts. EA made the first college football video game. On May the 17th, 1993, EA Sports announced the company had reached a deal with legendary 49ers head coach and then head coach at Stanford University, Bill Walsh. And Bill Walsh College Football released for the Sega Genesis and Sega CD that September, followed by a Super NES version in early 1994. Developed by High Score Productions, Bill Walsh College Football was effectively John Madden football with a collegiate coat of paint, borrowing many elements from that game, including its mechanics, its presentation elements, and its, in my opinion, annoying as hell window-based passing system. And old school sports video game fans will know exactly what I'm talking about. Features EA marketed for Bill Walsh College Football included reverse angle instant replays, customizable audibles, 24 contemporary schools, and 24 historic teams. EA also boasted the game was the first title to utilize the company's four-way play, which was a multi-tap adapter for the Genesis that allowed for up to 4 simultaneous players. And let me bring up some footage of that. All right, so this on the screen now is Bill Walsh College Football, showing a game between SC and Raleigh. We'll talk about that in a second, about the names. With some very Genesis music. So you have SC lining up for the kickoff. The perspective is up and down perspective on the game. And we see a 56-yard kick return for 19 yards. And so you can see a little bit of the play select screen here. And the players lining up. And the snap. We've got to run on the outside. Barrels for 5 yards. I want to show a little bit of the passing system so you can see what that looks like. 35, 24, let's see, that's the little windows. That used to be the way the passing system was in Madden. It's terrible. So that's a little bit of Bill Walsh College Football.
Was that also from 92?
That was from 1993.
I also think that looks pretty good.
Yeah, it's good for what it is. And that was built off a pretty decent engine. EA had made the engine for Madden NFL football. I want to say the first John Madden football first came out in 1991. And they had started turning them into annual ones. And they built that engine. They took that engine and they put a college football branding on it. Hey there, fellow netizens. This is Kevin in the editor's chair with a brief correction here. I was off by a couple of years. John Madden Football, the first in what came to be known as the Madden NFL series, was first published in 1988. Apologies for the error. And back to the show. You might have noticed in the video footage you saw there, interestingly, that one thing that Bill Walsh College Football didn't have was a license for any real college football teams, which is kind of a big omission when you're making a college football video game. And so what that tells me is they didn't have a license with the NCAA and they didn't have a license with any of the schools. So what they did instead is they put together legally distinct versions of real American colleges and universities bearing roughly similar color schemes to the real schools. And some of the names changed to the towns where the schools are based. So for example, we saw in that footage, Raleigh. Raleigh's supposed to be North Carolina State. Other schools were like Penn State was just called State College. Ohio State was called Columbus. BYU, or Brigham Young University, was called Provo. It's in Provo, Utah. And USC, as we saw there, the clearly legally distinct school of SC instead of USC. However, state colleges whose names were states, like Florida, Michigan, Nebraska, Wisconsin, were basically unchanged. I assume because you can't just trademark a state's name, although I wouldn't put it past Ron DeSantis to try. And as with NCAA basketball, Bill Walsh College Football was another big hit among critics and fans. During a January 1994 quarterly earnings report, EA boasted the game was a top 20 bestseller. EA followed up the success of Bill Walsh College Football the next year with Bill Walsh College Football 95, which came out for the Genesis and Sega CD just in time for the start of the 1994-95 season. This one ditched the historic teams, so it didn't have those 24. And the way that worked was like, they were basically historic versions of older teams. So like Boston College, I think it was just called Boston in there. They had Boston 1984 for the 1984 BC team that was led by Doug Flutie, for example. And so in this newer game, they got rid of the historic teams, but they had 36 teams and they were fully licensed this time. So they had the real branding for them. And the only thing I'm going to show you of this game is that one thing they also added was at the beginning, a little pregame commentary by Bill Walsh, and his 16-bit visage is one of the most horrifying things I've seen in a while. So I'm going to show you some brief footage of that. Look at him go.
Wow.
It's just this digital mouth moving in the rest of his faces. And what in the jib jab are we doing here?
That does look a lot like Bill Walsh, and I didn't expect that for a game from 93.
Again, the graphics are not bad for what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And this was also a pretty positively viewed game, too. It did pretty well. It's part of what inspired EA to continue this, I imagine. And a year after that, EA put out its first college basketball game. In March 1995, coinciding with the start of the men's basketball tournament, EA put out Coach K's College Basketball, licensing with Duke University men's basketball coach Mike Krzyzewski, aka Coach K. The game boasted 32 teams, up to 4-player play, customizable tournaments, and 8 historic teams. And as with Bill Walsh College Football, Coach K's College Basketball was another bestseller for EA, which noted the game as one of its best-selling products during its first quarter in 1995, per a quarterly earnings report. That same year, Electronic Arts put out another college football game. This kind of starts the annual release cycle they have for these games. They put it out for the Sega Genesis, and following Bill Walsh's retirement, EA rebranded the latest version for the 1995-96 season as College Football USA 96. Now, College Football USA was a kind of umbrella brand that the Collegiate Licensing Company, which was at the time the ones who handled the license for the schools, it was kind of a blanket term they were using to market the sport. So College Football USA. And so the new video game after Walsh retires is called College Football USA 96. And they used that name in a bunch of other places in the mid-90s too. And they did it again the year later in 1996 with College Football USA 97. And this one, as a kid, I played a lot of. And the thing that'll always stick in my head is the opening music. It had a digitized version of a guy saying, "Welcome to College Football USA," but it's so garbled on the 16-bit, so it always just came out as, and it runs on a loop. So you hear that like every few minutes when you're going through the menus, just over and over again.
That's pretty funny.
For the 1997-98 season, the 16-bit generation is over. This time around, their new game comes out for the PlayStation and the PC CD-ROM. And at this point, they're not using the College Football USA brand anymore. They call it what it was called for a while after that, NCAA Football 98. The game boasts a ton of new features that would become standard for college football games, including all Division I schools. At the time, there were 112 of them. It included recruiting, realistic uniforms and stadiums, a selection of real college fight songs, and the ability to play in major bowls like the Sugar, Fiesta, and Orange Bowls, as well as the National Championship. And EA would put out an annual NCAA football title every year until 2013, the last being NCAA Football 14, which, as we learned last time, was the last college sports video game until EA Sports College Football 25. Meanwhile, in 1998, after a 3-year hiatus from the digital court, Electronic Arts released NCAA March Madness 98 for the PlayStation, and EA released a new college basketball game every year until 2009, the last being NCAA Basketball 10 for the PS3 and 360. My understanding is the basketball ones never sold that well, and that eventually they phase them out because they're not the kind of big seller the football games are. EA also briefly dabbled in college baseball video games. In 2006, following the loss of their Major League Baseball license to rival 2K Sports, EA rebranded their, in my opinion, amazing MVP baseball series from a professional ball game until a college one, with the first game in the series being MVP 06 NCAA Baseball, which came out for the PlayStation 2 and original Xbox. And they put out one more game in the series a year later, and ever since then, there has not been a college baseball game. I think for a lot of the reasons is like basketball, it just wasn't selling all that well. College baseball is not as popular as college football is. However, I will also point out that EA was, for a time, not the only player in the college sports video game business during the 1990s and early 2000s. And I'll give you a brief rundown of some other notable titles that were put out during that period that didn't open with EA Sports. It's in the game when you booted them up. For example, there was College Football National Championship, which was Sega's version. So it was made by Sega Sports and released for the Genesis on September 2nd, 1994. And College Football National Championship boasted 32 officially licensed schools. It had season and tournament play. It had 1 to 4 players. And it had a battery backup system to save records and stats. It is also, in my opinion, the worst of the two games between that and Bill Walsh College Football. It's awkward to play. I've played both games. It doesn't have the weird passing boxes that Bill Walsh College Football had. Instead, it has this thing where, like, when you do a play, it will stop the action and like zoom in to a part of the field to give you like a more closer, and it's so jarring. So like if you drop back to pass and you throw it, there'll be a second where it's closer to the receiver and the screen will stop and like zoom in and you'll see the receiver. Or like when you're doing a running play, same thing too. They'll get the handoff and all of a sudden it'll zoom in. It's really weird.
So is it like that moment when you throw an interception in Madden and then like the whole perspective of the field changes?
A little bit like that. I'll show you a little bit of it. This will give you a little bit of a sense of how it looks. And like Madden with Bill Walsh College Football, this was based on a pro football series that Sega had done. It was just called NFL. So like there was NFL 94, NFL 95, NFL 96. And like with EA, they just basically just use the same model. You'll also notice in here, it also, I think, is the first college sports game with live audio commentary. This is this guy, Lon Simmons. He was a San Francisco Giants announcer and a San Francisco 49ers announcer. And he lent his digital voice, and they would do like an AI version of him in a bunch of Sega games, like NFL Sports Talk Football 93, Sports Talk Baseball, where he would react to what was happening in real time. So you can see a little bit of that here too.
Man in motion.
So drops back, makes the throw, and watch. It's going to zoom in.
Caught by the receiver. He's down. First down for the Eagles. A gain of 25 with 1:14 remaining in the quarter.
It's a little jarring, both the visual presentation and the audio presentation. I played a lot of sports talk baseball, and that commentary is constant. So you're like, throws to second, throws to first, throws to third. And it's always like a step behind because it can't catch up.
It's funny. I always wanted to know what it would be like for Stephen Hawking to commentate a game. Montana back to pass, and oh shit, he just got lit up.
I was trying to think of a joke and I could not.
I would actually want to see a game having been commentated by Stephen Hawking.
I was trying to think of a cliche, like over the top line. I got one. It was like, oh, the defense really pinned their ears back on that one. Nothing doing.
It doesn't take an interstellar genius to tell. Sometimes you just have to get rid of the ball.
And critics agreed. They thought that this game was generally Bill Walsh College Football was received better than College Football National Championship. But Sega kind of stuck around for college sports stuff. For example, after taking a few years off, Sega relaunched its college football series in 2001 with NCAA College Football 2K2, The Road to the Rose Bowl, which was released for the Dreamcast. And they followed this up a year later with NCAA College Football 2K3, which came out for the PS2, Xbox, and GameCube. Each of those titles was developed by Visual Concepts, who interestingly developed the SNES version of Bill Walsh College Football. So they had a history of this. And they went on to create arguably the greatest football video game ever made, ESPN NFL 2K5. I don't know if you've heard anything about ESPN NFL 2K5, Phil.
No, I haven't. What was so great about it?
I'll give you a really, really short version here. So for a while, NFL video games are a competitive thing. There are a lot of games coming out. And the two big ones were NFL 2K and Madden. In 2004, Sega Sports wanted to try to undercut Madden. They added a whole bunch of really, really cool features in their game. For example, they had first-person football. There's a thing where you can do first-person's perspective. It's a really deep franchise mode, but the most important thing they did to try to undercut Madden is they sold it for $20. So when Madden is coming out for $50, Sega Sports put theirs out for $20.
Wow. I wish there were more games like that because maybe Madden would kind of push the envelope a little bit better nowadays.
A lot of people are saying that. And this game became pretty well beloved, both for its features and the fact that, eventually, EA does get the exclusive NFL license. And every year they got more and more stagnant. And people have been trying to get the NFL to get out of an exclusivity deal. I don't think they will because they made too much money off of it. And ESPN NFL 2K5 became kind of a symbol of that. People like the features, people like the presentation, people like stuff like first-person football. That part's not my thing, but it is a fun game overall. And people still keep it alive. There's a huge fan community around it. People make roster updates. People make uniform updates. You can play the modern NFL rosters in 2K5 on the PC. It's got a really active community and people really, really do love it. It's one of the most beloved football video games ever made. And the cover athlete was Tio.
Oh, nice. Are you going to show us a clip of it?
Would you like to see it?
Yeah, I would.
Okay. The people like not just the on the field stuff, but the presentation. It had an ESPN brand. So they had digital Chris Berman would announce games. They would do halftime shows. They would do a recap of the whole week where they would show clips from the games that were in there. All this stuff is not in Madden. It had tons of historic logos. So this is a little bit of the team select. Let's cut ahead to, there's the Eagles. So there's another presentation.
This is 05?
Yeah, this came out in 2004.
We've got a couple of offensive powerhouses down on the field. No doubt about it, Dan. We could be in for a high-scoring game today.
Boo.
What we call a scat back. He's a small, light running back with incredible.
Let's do some gameplay footage. Here's the kickoff. Good old David Akers kicking off.
And we are underway. Number 13 axes it back at the 7. Tackled at the 27. Number 13 tried to run it out, but the defense preferred that he stayed put, and they made their case pretty forcefully there.
And I'll cut ahead to.
The Buccaneers.
People like the presentation is pretty good for what it is. The announcing is pretty good.
That's great.
It's got Mike Allstott in it, so that's pretty good.
It's also really cool that the score stuff is what you would see if you were watching an NFL game on ESPN, if you're watching ESPN Monday Night Football. So that part of, like, you know, you actually playing the game is kind of cool.
Yeah, and that was the whole part of it, is they wanted to recreate the broadcast. I thought you'd like this as an old school Eagles fan, Bill. Here's some of here's some of the Eagles offense.
Is that Mark Simino? I recognize him because of the neck thing.
Yeah, that was Simino.
Oh my God.
Got Don McNabb, Brian Westbrook, T.O., Todd Pigston, Fred X, Chad Lewis. They're all here.
Well, I mean, this isn't true to life because Donovan didn't throw the ball at anybody's feet.
Press X to throw up in a high pressure situation.
One of the jokes my friend used to make about Todd Pinkston trying to catch a pass from Donovan McNabb, he would go, "Oh, geez, Donovan, you almost hit me right in the numbers." So be careful with that. Sorry, Todd. It's amazing. Like, when you think of video games, like the way you came up in the 80s and 90s, you think of them as being like, 20 years ago, they didn't have nearly the technology we have today. But here we are, like 20 years after that game came out, and that game looks great.
And that was the complaint about more modern games now. It's like, this is the stuff they took from us. Like, all these features that were in there, the presentation looks really cool. You may say the graphics, the graphics are 20 years old. They're PS2 graphics. But overall, the bones of this game are pretty solid. There's a reason why people keep playing it, why it's had so much longevity. And there's a reason why people want 2K to get back into this stuff. The cynic in me says they never will. But and that all has to do with the exclusive NFL license. But this might be a story in of itself, doing this game. In fact, this actually segues well into it. So other college football games that were put out during the 90s and 2000s included NCAA football for the Super NES, which was developed by The Software Toolworks. And it was released in 1994, which is, as far as I can tell, this was the first college football video game to have the NCAA license. This NCAA football video game, it's not supposed to be that great, the game. And there was also the NCAA Game Breaker series, which was put out every year by Sony for the PS1 and PS2 between 1996 and 2003. So those are some of the other college football video games that are out at the time. And however, EA eventually looked out at the lucrative college football video game landscape and asked themselves, why should we share? And in April of 2005, Electronic Arts secured an exclusive licensing deal with the Collegiate Licensing Company, giving EA the exclusive rights to release college football video games because competition is the essence of the free market. This is also when they also got that NFL exclusivity deal too.
So what versions of college football did that now cut out?
Any video game that came out after this could not have NCAA branding or the CLC branding because of his exclusive. So at this point, they couldn't do the NCAA, that Game Breaker series. They couldn't do the NCAA 2K series. It had to all go through EA.
Got it. Okay.
I will say that the collegiate sports video game market remained a little bit more consistently diverse when it came to basketball. And perhaps my favorite of the bunch, at least from my childhood, doesn't mean it's a good game, but it's one I played the most of, was a game called Dick Vitale's Awesome Baby College Hoops, which was developed and published by Time Warner Interactive and released for the Genesis in 1994. Now, have either of you heard of Dick Vitale?
Yes, I've heard of Dick Vitale.
Have you heard of this name, Kate?
Oh.
What do you know about Dick Vitale, Phil?
Dick Vitale is, ever since he was born, he was between 70 and 75 years old. He has a weird, creepy, youthful exuberance. He has some really strange yet endearing catchphrases. And sometimes he wears giant mascot heads to signify which team he's picking. Is that Dick Vitale?
That's Lee Corso.
That's Lee Corso.
Yeah, Lee Corso does that for football where he wears the mascot heads. So yeah, Dick Vitale, he's a fun character. For the uninitiated, Dick Vitale is a former basketball coach and a longtime color commentator who developed a reputation for his high energy delivery, punctuated by a library of wacky catchphrases. For example, if someone made a particularly stunning dunk, he might yell, "That's a dipsy-do dunkaroo!" An exciting matchup might inspire him to declare, "It's gonna be awesome, baby," with a capital A. And he would often yell, "It's a TO, baby," during the most exciting moment in college basketball, a timeout.
Man, they don't have commentators like this anymore. That's a real shame. That's a shame because all the commentators now are essentially different variations of the same milquetoast person.
I know. You need more people like Dick Vitale. His energy is so infectious. It's fun watching games covered by Dick Vitale. And if you thought all that shtick that I just went through gets old quickly, then maybe Dick Vitale's also maybe college hoops isn't for you, because that's about 90% of the game's audio presentation is his catchphrases. And the rest of it is MIDI renditions of several real college fight songs, as well as one sick guitar lick that plays every time there's a steal. If you get a turnover, you hear every time. But I will say this, clearly they knew that this might be an issue because there is a mute option where you can silence Dick Vitale in his own video game. I will say the gameplay is all right. It's relatively solid. The presentation's a little better in NCAA basketball, but it's very similar to that. It's also the only licensed brand they got for this game was Dick Vitale. There is no NCAA brand. There are no licensed teams. It's 32 generic teams that are just named after states. So you've got like Florida, Texas, there's a New Jersey team. But what's kind of neat about that, though, is that you can edit the names and colors of the teams, which I think makes this the first college video game with customizable teams. I actually have the box right over here. What's also fun about this, and this is the one I got from when I was a kid, is it has in it, in the box, is a poster which promotes a whole bunch of Dick Vitale merch.
You're joking.
I wish I was. I'm going to show it up on the screen here. You can see a bunch of the stuff you can get from Dick Vitale.
What do those hats say?
The hats say The Rock. I guess if Dwayne Johnson ever puts out hats with his name, he's got to give money to Dickie V, to Dick Vitale. You know. The other things that are on here are we've got a Dick Vitale official size synthetic basketball. I guess The Rock, because the basketball protect the rock and all that stuff. Our largest selling synthetic ball features Dick's PT per logo. I don't know what that means. This rock is great for every player, regardless of age or skill level. It plays and feels like a leather ball, but withstands the toughest punishment for any indoor or outdoor event. He's got his official hats. He's got rubber basketballs. He's got a Dick Vitale shirt, which just has a caricature of Dick Vitale's face on it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it's a neat little thing. It's not a bad game, too. If you're looking for a hidden sports gem on the Genesis, give that game a try.
Did you know that Dick Vitale is still alive?
Oh, yeah, he's still around. I think he's still announcing.
Oh, he's like 85.
Yeah, that's like speaking of like Lee Corso. Lee Corso is kind of his equivalent in college football. For those who don't know, Lee Corso was a longtime coach, I want to say, of Louisville. His whole thing is he would do pick-ems for the games of the week, and he would do it by putting the mascot's head on, which was fun to watch. And he used to be an announcer for a while in the NCAA football video games. Corso was one of them. He's a fun character. Yeah, you don't see those kinds of commentators anymore. Meanwhile, Tom Brady's going to be an announcer.
Great. Can't wait.
We were in a bar today watching the Rutgers game, and he is haunting looking, Tom Brady.
Yeah, he's really like gaunt, and it looks like he's had like work done. And
yeah, he just doesn't look like he's having fun.
Yeah, he's got like the most sinewy looking jaw. Like you can almost see like the bones that connect his jaw together and stuff. It's so unsettling to look at him. He's unpleasant to look at, in my opinion. This might not necessarily go in the episode, but he's unpleasant to look at.
There, I said it.
Tom Brady makes so much more money than me. He could crush me.
Oh my God.
Okay, so that's one of these examples of these sort of non-EA college basketball games. You saw a bunch of games like this. So there was College Slam. You've heard of NBA Jam? I assume both of you heard of NBA. College Slam is basically just NBA Jam with a college brand on it. It's the exact same game. It came up for like every system that existed. It was made by Iguana. Iguana were the guys who made Turok. And before they made Turok, they made College Slam. Fun fact about College Slam, there's a code in there, at least there was in the Genesis one, where if you rotated the D-pad a lot before the tip-off, your character would turn into a tornado and it could just run over everybody on the court. Bad sportsmanship's the essence of NBA Jam. From other games, there was NCAA Championship Basketball, which was a DOS game from 1996. It was put out by GTE. There was also NCAA Final Four 97, put out by Mindscape, which came out for the PlayStation and PC in March of 1997. Fun thing about NCAA Championship Basketball, it's considered abandonware. You can find it for free online now. If you have a machine that will play it is a whole other question. And as they did in football, Sega also got involved in college basketball. They had a college basketball 2K series that ran between 2002 and 2007. The first game in the series debuted on the PS2, GameCube, and original Xbox. It was originally called NCAA College Basketball 2K3. It eventually gained a brand tie-in with ESPN. So around the same time they did it for the NFL series, they got it for college basketball too. And they put out two games together called ESPN College Hoops and ESPN College Hoops 2K5, which both released for the PS2 and Xbox. Sorry, GameCube fans. At that point, a lot of sports game companies were jumping ship off. Yeah. I still love you though. And after that, they put out three more titles under the name College Hoops. They didn't have the ESPN branding anymore. They were just called College Hoops, and they were College Hoops 2K6, College Hoops 2K7, and College Hoops 2K8. And that was the last of the college basketball games for Sega. And all of this is to say is, again, for a while, there were tons of options. If you wanted to play out, your digital hoop dreams, or maybe transform a real world college football doormat into a perennial powerhouse, like I did for every college football game I did, because it's the only way I feel like I'm ever going to live to see a Rutgers national championship. And these kinds of video game deals used to generate millions of dollars in profits for the NCAA, their member schools, their respective licensing companies, and game companies like Sega and EA. For example, during their quarterly earnings report on October the 29th, 2013, EA announced the company generated $1.04 billion in revenue, citing the release of NCAA Football 14 as part of their success that quarter. And moreover, at the time, this is from an ESPN report from September 26, 2013, video games were the second largest source of licensing revenue for colleges, second only to apparel. So they were huge moneymakers for college sports for a while.
Wow. And 14 was the last time NCAA football was put out, right?
Yeah, that was the last college sports game of any of them until EA put out College Football 25.
So despite being that lucrative, it was worth more to simply not put out the game and not have to share the revenue with the players? That's pretty hard to believe, Kevin.
Funny you bring that up. I will say we are going to talk about that in a later episode, but skipping ahead, basically the NCAA and a lot of these big football programs thought that it was more in their interest to have the players get nothing as opposed to something. And eventually it got to the point, and we'll talk about this in more detail, but like eventually there were legal battles where a bunch of players sued the NCAA and sued EA because they were getting nothing for these things. And it seems to be that the NCAA nixed video games for a while, basically citing that they were trying to get through their legal troubles first. And EA is not the kind of company that's going to do a video game without the knowing where things are settling with those, because they don't want to be in a position where they're sued by the NCAA. And it seems like, again, skipping ahead, we'll do more detail of this in a later episode, but it seemed like from the standpoint of the people who made the video games, it was cheaper and easier for them to wait to figure out how everything shook out rather than take a huge financial risk and keep this thing going. They did, I will say this, when the NCAA ceased their licensing deal with EA in 2013, the Collegiate Licensing Company, which is the ones who handle all the licensing deals for the schools, was on board, and EA did put out statements saying that they wanted to continue. And then eventually they said they wouldn't do it anymore. And I've got to imagine that a lot of that was because they were waiting to see how the litigation shook out, because at that point there's still a lot of litigation going on. But yeah, you bring up a really good point, because one notable group of people who saw no measurable gains from these digital cash cows were the people you think were most responsible for their success, the players. And a lot of the conversation right now in college sports is what's called NIL, name, image, and likeness, which is, again, effectively the ability for players to negotiate and get compensation on their behalf for representations of themselves. And that's everything from merchandise, appearances on television, rebroadcast of games, their jerseys, their apparel, and their digital likenesses like in video games. And NIL is the big conversation. And historically, when it came to NIL, when we talk about athletes, if we're talking about pro athletes, the way those deals happen with, for Madden, for NBA 2K, was they would set them up either individually with a specific athlete, and there are a couple of really notable cases of that, but more likely they're doing it through their players' unions. The NFLPA, the NBPA, and all those kinds of things. They're setting up those big deals. But college players don't have that. And when it comes to college athletes, historically, it's been a different story than in the pros because, again, they don't have a players' union. And for the longest time, there was no expectation that they would have any kind of compensation for the likeness. That seemed to belong to, the colleges and to the NCAA. And what's really interesting about that when it comes to college sports is that while NIL has been a more recent topic of debate when it comes to college video games, monetizing college players' athletes without their consent or compensation was a part of college sports gaming from the very beginning. From their inception, college sports video games were built and marketed on how well they recreated the real-world sporting experiences, including true-to-life uniforms, colors, logos, stadiums, fight songs, real-world events like bowl games, the national championship, March Madness. And this pursuit of realism also included the players. And now, to be fair, no college sports games until EA Sports College Football 25 included the names of current players in their games as part of their rosters. However, in pursuit of maximum accuracy, and that, again, the big watchword when it comes to college video games is realism. How realistically are we recreating the experience of going to a game, of playing college sports and all that stuff? And as a result, teams often included players with similar likenesses, playing styles, and most importantly, numbers of actual college athletes to give gamers a taste of what was going on in collegiate stadiums and arenas at the time. And some game studios even promoted their college titles by hosting simulations of real-life games, encouraging people to see those parallels, to see these things as a stand-in for the real thing. For example, leading up to and following the release of College Football National Championship in September 1994, Sega hosted a series of virtual matchups based on real games that were happening in the season. And eventually, they predicted that Nebraska would be that season's eventual national champion. And challenging players to prove us wrong was the slogan. So to prove them wrong on whether or not the Huskers would win the whole thing. As an aside, Sega was right. Nebraska did win the national championship that year.
What year was that?
That was in the 1994-95 season.
Wow.
And even in the 16-bit graphics era, few observers failed to note that college sports video games provided digital recreations of real players. For example, in 1993, Nintendo hosted a publicity event where they simulated that year's Final Four matchup in the SNES game NCAA Basketball. So while March Madness is happening, they did these digital matchups in a publicity stunt to say who was going to win the March Madness championship. And they predicted that the University of Kentucky would beat UNC, or the University of North Carolina, 88-80 in the men's championship. And noting in an April 1st, 1993 press release, the exemplary performance of, quote, a certain versatile 6'8" Kentucky All-American who led all scorers with 37 points, end quote. And if you were a basketball fan, you knew that that player they're talking about was Jamal Mashburn, who played for Kentucky.
Oh, he did? And this was 94?
93. This is 93.
Okay. And then he got drafted by the Wizards.
I think so. Why did I think he was a Knick?
No, wait, you're right. No. I was thinking of Jerry Stackhouse.
Stackhouse was a Piston. Well, I can't remember if he was started as a Piston, though, because he was a Sixer. Let's see, Jamal Mashburn.
You're going to have to edit all of this out because all of this is wrong.
Mashburn was drafted by the Mavericks. He played with the Heat and the Hornets, too. And what did we say, Jerry Stackhouse?
Yeah.
Stackhouse was drafted by the Sixers in 95. He played for the Pistons, Wizards, Mavericks, Bucks, Heat, Hawks, and Brooklyn Nets. He moved around a lot.
So what happened in that championship game?
I'm glad you asked that about the real one. So the digital one, NCAA Basketball, the video game, predicted it was going to be Kentucky beating UNC. They were wrong. Unlike College Football National Championship, they got this one wrong. UNC beat Michigan in the real title game. Truly, Sega does what Nintendo. But again, going back to what I was saying before, this whole thing about using these digital recreations, people playing these games knew this too. So for example, in a review of Bill Walsh College Football 95 for the Madison-based Wisconsin State Journal, the writers of the review made it clear that even though the players weren't named, it was obvious who they represented. And they cited players from the University of Wisconsin who appeared with their real-world numbers in the game. So this is from that article from the Wisconsin State Journal, quote, no players' names are mentioned in the Bill Walsh College Football 95 game, but the roster is obviously that of the club that inhabits Camp Randall Stadium. The quarterback is number 11, Darrell Bevel. Halfback 1 is number 33, Brent Moss. Halfback 2 is number 41, Terrell Fletcher. Split end 1 is number 2, Lee DeRamus. Split end 2 is number 1, J.C. Dawkins. And the kicker is number 14, John Hall, end quote. A year later, Mike Snyder made a similar observation in a USA Today review for Coach K College Basketball, writing, quote, though unnamed, players perform just like the originals. Example, Maryland's big man is the same number of moves of player of the year candidate Joe Smith, end quote. So people who are playing these games, they know these are the players. There's another review I saw where a guy talked about playing in Bill Walsh College football as one of the historic teams. And the team he played through in his review was Boston College 84, or Boston 84 it would have been. And he talks about the quarterback whose number is 80 was Doug Flutie. It's obviously Doug Flutie.
So their image and likeness extends past their name. It's their stats, how they perform, the year, the number, etc.
Yeah. If you have a college football team and like their star quarterback is like, let's say a 6'5" junior from like Massachusetts or whatever, and we know he's got a cannon for an arm, and then you make a digital version where you have a 6'5" quarterback from Massachusetts who has really, really high throw power stats, who has the exact same number, then you can make the argument that he is supposed to be a digital version of that person.
Well, what if I gave the digital version like a peg leg or something? That would be completely different, right?
You see, if we did that, then we would have had college football games for the last 11 years. They're eye patches. They got robot arms. This guy's wait. I realize I'm just describing Mutant Football League.
Well, I guess I could have done that, but then it wouldn't be what people want, right?
Yeah. And that's the thing is like realism is the foundation of what these games are being marketed on. And so part of that is the players, regardless of they're calling them or not, And people are playing them because, like, if you're playing a video game, because say you're playing like NCAA football, like 06, and you want to play it because you're a Michigan fan. You want to play as Michigan because they're players you like on Michigan's team. And so you like the idea, if I'm going to see, like, I'm a big Rutgers football fan. If I'm playing a video game and I'm watching Colin Monungai, who is a transcendently talented running back that Rutgers has right now. He's arguably the best running back in the Big Ten. If I'm playing a video game of Rutgers, I would love to have Colin Monungai out there because he's really, really good. I want to recreate the experiences I'm seeing or, have better outcomes, like have Rutgers actually beat Michigan or Ohio State or Wisconsin or somebody. But all of this is to say, like, people aren't stupid. They see this. They see these things and they're like, well, obviously they're just putting the players in there and they're just not calling them that. I'm wearing a number 4 jersey right now for Rutgers. And at the time this jersey was offered, there was a very, very talented wide receiver who played for Rutgers named Leonte Carew. And Leonte Carew wore number 4. And at the same time, Rutgers in the university bookstore at the apparel store at the stadium sold a number 4 Rutgers jersey. It doesn't have a name on the back of it, you'll see.
But it's clearly his jersey.
But one could argue they're selling a Leonte Carew jersey, and that I'm wearing one right now, And as the graphics improved and the features expanded, later iterations of NCAA football and NCAA March Madness, and of course the other later games too, include digital versions of real-world players in effectively everything but name. As one example, probably one of my favorite college football video games, the one I probably put the most time into is NCAA Football 07 for the PS2. I bought it really cheap at a used game store for like $2 when I was in college, and I just played the hell out of that game. I played so many seasons of this game. If you happen to peruse the game's roster, and as one example, say you were to settle upon the Florida Gators, University of Florida, among the notable players you will see is a 6'3", 225-pound left-handed freshman quarterback from Florida bearing the number 15. Does that sound familiar?
That's Tebow, right?
It's Tim Tebow. And
yeah, and if he can't pass worth a lick, it's definitely Tim Tebow.
Yeah, longtime football fans will recognize this as clearly a digitized version of former Florida quarterback, 2007 Heisman Trophy winner, and ESPN's favorite special boy, Tim Tebow. No one has been more coddled by sports media than Tim Tebow. Everyone's so proud of him when he can throw a ball like a normal person.
Well, that's what caught everybody off guard. That's why he won that playoff game. It's like, is he throwing a pass? Oh my God.
We're back in Scandalous Games Sportschat here now because talking about one of the biggest reaches in the history of the NFL draft. One thing with college players is like you can just be a really good athlete. You can be stronger and faster than most people on the field. And part of that is because in college, like 99% of the people who are playing in college football are not going to be NFL players. So like if you're playing like Akron, most of those guys are going to be like insurance adjusters and things like that, when they leave. They're not looking to be in the NFL because the speed is so much. And so as a result, you have some guys who can be just really talented and they can dominate people because of their pure athleticism. And Tim Tebow is a great example of that. He was never a strong quarterback. He has a really awkward throw. What was his freshman year? He was mostly they bring on these things called jump passes. where he would just go behind center and he would just kind of jump up and do like a basketball shot to somebody. It's not a good throw. No one told this transcendently talented college player really how to throw a ball like most quarterbacks, which made him very fun to watch in college, but it means he can't compete in the NFL. He was drafted really high. People assume he'd be like a really talented tight end or a fullback. Denver Broncos drafted him, I think, 24th overall. Everyone says this is a reach. He had one great playoff game where people, oh, he's finally good. And then he wasn't that good. But ESPN loved covering Tim Tebow. And they would have all these things about, see, his throwing style is getting so much better. And then when he washed it in the NFL, it's like, see, he's going to be a baseball player. Look how talented he is as a baseball player. We were so rooting for you, Tim. And when he washed out of that, we're going to make you an ESPN analyst.
Oh my God.
Who has fallen upward more than Tim Tebow?
Well, yeah, but you're leaving out the most important thing. People loved Tim Tebow. They were obsessed with him. Like he had this whole following built around like some of his personal stuff. And what's crazy is he's one of the only athletes where, because I remember there was that, I think it was a Monday Night Football game against the Jets in 2012. And they did the one, like he couldn't pass. It was like towards the end of the game, they were down and they rushed him and they did the one thing they couldn't do. They over pursued and he ran around everybody and he ran into the end zone and everybody lost their minds because everybody on the team had some sort of divine belief in Tim Tebow and everybody in the stands had that belief and he can't really pass. And somehow that collective belief willed that thing to, it was one of the weirdest, it was such a weird thing. So like, I don't begrudge people having like weird connections with players because he was the Wildcat quarterback for a year with the Eagles too. But it is weird that somebody like that cannot get compensated for their college playing time because that was when he's most popular and probably generated millions and millions and millions of dollars in revenue for Florida.
Yeah. And the last thing I'll say about Tim Tebow's NFL career is that he got publicity because he would kneel for the national anthem because he was he's a good Christian boy and he's praying. And yet somehow people were not pissed off when he did that. When Colin Kaepernick and later other NFL players, I wonder what was different between the two of them. They're totally okay with kneeling. They could.
Are you saying there's a double standard here? I don't. That doesn't sound like people.
No, they would never do that. I guess we'll never know, Kate.
Life's mysteries. My goodness. And it's funny you mention that too, because eventually Tim Tebow was the cover athlete for NCAA Football 11. When at that point he was a pro.
I will say this, Kevin. You know why Tim Tebow is relatable? It's because, like the three of us and him, we all got paid the same amount of money for being featured in that year's NCAA football. $0.
Yeah.
That's unbelievable.
He's just like us. Yeah. So so this exercise where I just say I picked out a player, in this case, number 15 at Florida, who was pretty obviously Tim Tebow. You can do this exercise for virtually any other player in the game. So, for example, here's a couple of other ones. In NCAA Football 7, the University of Oklahoma has a 98 rated running back wearing number 28. I'm going to test your knowledge, Phil. You think you can guess who this player is?
And what year?
This is in 07. So 07 comes out in 2006. So it's 2006-2007 season. Would have been playing
Adrian Peterson.
It is Adrian Peterson. I mean, it's probably Adrian Peterson. His stats are so high. He left Oklahoma in 2007. This is probably Adrian Peterson.
Oh, yeah. And like Adrian Peterson is a public figure. Like he's more famous than many NFL players at that point in his career. So it would be obvious when you're using his likeness in the game.
Yeah, he was crazy good at Oklahoma. Cal, University of California, in that game has a 94 rated running back with number 10.
Cal in 07?
Yeah, in 07. 06, 07, yeah. I tried to pick people for this that were people who were in the 2007 NFL draft. So he would have been an NFL player for the 07-08 season.
Wait, he's okay. Who did he get drafted by?
Seattle Seahawks.
Oh, is that Marshawn Lynch?
Beast mode himself. That's gotta be.
My
that's
God.
Gotta be beast mode. Yeah.
Oh, he was on the same team with Aaron Rodgers.
That's right. Yeah, he was at Cal too. I bet you.
Sorry, Kate. I know this is obnoxious. I apologize.
I bet you if I looked up his number, it'd be Aaron Rodgers in there too. Hey there, fellow netizens. It's an error-filled episode today, isn't it? This is Kevin back in the editor's chair with another really, really brief correction. This is clarifying Marshawn Lynch. And while Marshawn Lynch might be best known as winning a Super Bowl with the famous Legion of Boom Seattle Seahawks, he was not drafted by the Seattle Seahawks. In fact, Marshawn Lynch was drafted in 2007 by the Buffalo Bills as the 12th overall pick in the first round of the NFL draft. So apologies for the error, and back to the show. And I'll do one last one. There's a 98 rated wide receiver at Georgia Tech with number 21. This is relevant.
Larry Fitzgerald?
Think
or
about
Calvin Johnson.
I was going to say it's relevant to the show that you host in addition to this. So we were talking about Beast Wars. It is Calvin Johnson, aka Megatron.
Megatron. Oh, yeah, that's right. Wow. So none of those people got paid for being in college because, like, at their stats at those times, they would have been insanely fun players to play.
Yeah. One of the things I did when I got that game is that was 06-07. That was the one year that Rutgers was like worth a damn. They were seventh in the BCS rankings. They beat a number 3 Louisville team at one point. It was incredible. And one of the things I did with that game was I just went through the entire roster and I just put all of the real Rutgers players, and most of them were just name for number. And like, it wasn't that hard. I still have a save file where I can just look on here. Those are all the Rutgers players that were on there. But yeah, this game had historic teams too. So for example, you could be for Boston College 1984, their quarterback is number 22, which is
Doug Flutie.
That's Doug Flutie, yeah. Quarterback number 16 for Tennessee 1997.
Oh, that's Peyton Manning, right?
That's Peyton Manning. Yeah, it's got to be Peyton Manning. Or halfback number 21 for Oklahoma State 1988.
Oklahoma State? In what year?
1988.
I'm actually not going to get. Is this Herschel Walker?
Barry Sanders.
Barry Sanders.
Barry Sanders.
Oh, that's a deep cut.
And so many of EA's college football and basketball games, as I said, they give people the ability to edit the names of the athletes. So you can just put those names in yourself. And if you go online, there are files you can download that are just roster packages that take all those generic numbered players and just put the names in. And so basically you have a game where they're just the athletes. They're in there and they don't see anything from that.
But they did have to give them like peg legs or their left hands or hooks or something, because otherwise you really do have to pay them, right?
Why did they not think of that?
Are we going to talk about, remember the USC team with Matt Leinart and Reggie Bush and Lendale White, and they went up against the Texas Longhorns team with Vince Young?
Yeah, for the national championship.
That was the greatest football game I've ever seen. I remember the way people talked about Reggie Bush entering the NFL draft, and it felt like Reggie Bush was more famous as a college athlete than any active NFL player at that time. Like, and for him to have that level of notoriety and not be compensated at all for his likeness being used, like, how many copies of NCAA football with that USC team did they sell that year? They must have made tens of millions of dollars, right?
Yeah. And I've got to think about every couple of years, you have like these guys who just break out in college where like people, like everyone's standing up and taking notice of this guy. It's just like it's incredible to watch. Vince Young was that. Reggie Bush was that. Ricky Williams was that. Caleb Williams is that, where it's like, this guy's incredible to watch. And again, it's like one of these beastly athletes that's playing at college. And yeah, people want that experience. Like they want to win a natty with, Vince Young. They want to win a natty with Matt Leinart or whatever. And like, I would argue that I think that those video games are a pipeline that is fueled by that and vice versa. Like skipping ahead, like a lot of the discourse for College Football 25 I'm seeing online is people really excited for the start of the college football season because they can see those players that they were playing in the game in real life. Now, the difference now is they do get NIL deals and they are paid to be there. And so my argument here is that that was always there. It's just now they're finally getting something for that because, citing those early articles, this has been from the beginning. People have been making those connections that you're making. And it did not take long for current and former college athletes to take note of game developers' use of their digital appearance and realize they never had the opportunity to offer their consent, let alone receive any form of compensation for what appeared to be an obvious, I would argue, obvious use of their likeness. I mean, if you play NCAA football 07 and Arkansas running back number 5 runs like Darren McFadden and wears the same uniform and same number as Darren McFadden, chances are that Arkansas running back number 5 is Darren McFadden. But Darren McFadden never had a say in whether Arkansas running back number 5 appeared in NCAA football 07, and he certainly never saw a nickel for his college likeness until he was the cover athlete for NCAA football 09, which came out after he joined the pros and had an agent with whom he could negotiate with Electronic Arts on his behalf. So all of this is to say that taking advantage of college athletes' appearances in video games without any compensation has been built into this from the very beginning.
Okay, this is blowing my mind. It blows my mind the profile of the athletes who did not have enough clout and influence to be able to sue the NCAA at that time. I mean, you're talking about some pretty famous people.
I mean, some of that too is from what I've read from people who did sue the NCAA and did sue Electronic Arts, that for some athletes, and especially for high profile athletes, ones that have NFL aspirations, who want to be big names, who want to make the big money and all that stuff. And again, I'm not making a blanket statement, but just the ones I've heard of. There's a certain fear of upsetting the apple cart. Like if you are a big profile, like prospect who's coming out, if you start suing the NCAA, there's always that risk you might get blacklisted by the NFL. And that by doing that, you might be upsetting it enough that people won't take you on. And for some of them, there's that fear that like, you're not going to get anything out of this, that there's going to be a fear of if you stick your neck out, that you're going to come away with nothing. I think that might be a fear. That's certainly something that, for example, we're going to talk about a guy named Ed O'Bannon who did sue the NCAA. Ed O'Bannon was a player for UCLA, legendary player for UCLA in the mid-90s. And he eventually becomes probably the most high-profile person who sues the NCAA. And he talks about this in his memoir. He talks about like there's kind of a fear that people want to kind of like keep their head down, keep their mouth shut until they're out. And so I could see that instinct for like a Reggie Bush, like a Ricky Williams, like a Caleb Williams or whatever to, okay, this sucks, but I just need to put in my time until I can declare for the draft. And then I'll be okay. That's what I think might be something behind it. And so with that, I think that's a good place to wrap up here. And next time, we're going to dissect a little bit more about the larger system that college athletes play in, how the NCAA set up barriers to make it so they could not get anything for these kinds of representations, and start laying down the foundation. Like, what does it really mean to be a college player? For example, does a free ride from an athletic scholarship actually mean a free ride? And this will then set the foundation for the ways that college athletes have looked at the system, seen it as exploitative, and tried to take measures to fight back. And so before anybody else want to chime in, any other last thoughts?
I'm looking forward to touching on the concept of what is, what would be considered a free ride in terms of your education. Like, really, here's the benefit of being a college athlete that you should be so grateful for.
Yeah, I feel like that's going to be a really substantive conversation, because I feel like some of these people are not, student athletes are primarily going, we'll have that conversation when we have it. I'm also really interested to have that. I just can't believe at this point that they were making so much money and all they had to do was do a revenue share with the players. And like, how nefarious is what you're doing that when confronted with sharing the money, the best decision for yourself is to simply not put the game out?
Yeah, we're going to start setting up how that happened. And also, again, we'll talk about this term student athlete and how did we get to that and why we call college players student athlete, because that plays a lot into what you've just mentioned, Phil. This is where things are going to get interesting. These are where things are going to get a little frustrating too.
Well, all I have to say is good thing that being a student athlete is the only way that universities exploit students.
I cannot even comment on that as a former graduate student. I have nothing to say. No comment.
That'll probably be a pretty cool conversation for next time.
And that will do it for today's episode of Scandalous Games. If you like what we're doing and want to help the show, subscribe or follow us wherever you get your podcasts and leave us a rating. If you want to learn more, check out our website, scandalousgamespodcast.wordpress.com, where I publish the show notes and the sources for every episode. Our theme music is Occam Seek Me by Seek Knowledge via the Free Music Archive, used under a CC BY NCSA 3.0 US license. If you have a question, comment, or idea for a topic for a future episode, email us at scandalousgamespodcast@gmail.com. And until next time, I'm Kevin Impellizeri.
This has been a copyrighted telecast of Scandalous Games. No part of this may be redistributed without the express written consent of Kevin Impellizeri. For him and Kate, I'm Phil Thomas.
And I'm Kate.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you next Scandal. Subscribe to Fat Roll Gaming on YouTube and listen to So We Were Talking About Beast Wars wherever you get your podcasts.